Where is Prince Louis? This question has spread like wildfire across the United Kingdom since the youngest member of the Welsh family seemingly vanished from public view overnight. No more spontaneous grimaces on the balcony, no playful gestures at official engagements, no new footage from school events. The usually so present young prince has suddenly become invisible, and now the palace has officially confirmed the reason. But the brief explanation seems almost too clinical, too controlled. It speaks of protected time away from public life, of a decision made in the best interests of the young prince. Words meant to reassure, yet they raise new questions. Because anyone familiar with the workings of the monarchy knows that formulations are never accidental. Behind every sentence lies a carefully orchestrated strategy. For weeks, royal observers had noticed the first irregularities. First, everything seemed harmless. Perhaps a child with a cold. Perhaps just a conscious decision to protect Prince Louis from constant media attention. But as one engagement after another passed without his appearance, the unease grew. He was not seen at the Commonwealth Day service. There was no sign of him at the color-changing ceremony. His seat remained empty at the Remembrance Sunday event as well. While Prince George stood beside his father and Princess Charlotte smiled with her usual composure and discipline, there was a gap where Louis usually stood out with his vibrant energy. No photos, no short clips, not even a passing mention. The public's reaction grew increasingly irritated. 3 important engagements, where the entire family was traditionally expected, and Prince Louis was nowhere to be seen. In an institution that has thrived on symbolism and visibility for centuries, absence is never meaningless. Silence can be louder than any explanation. Then came the moment that sparked the speculation. The palace broke the silence with an officially worded statement, brief, matter-of-fact, almost clinical. It confirmed that Prince Louis would be spending a period away from the public eye. The decision had been carefully considered. No further details were given. It was precisely this reticence that left room for interpretation. Observers analyzed every word. Was it about privacy, health concerns, or an internal strategic decision? The statement seemed like a shield, but also a hint that there might be more to it. Historically, this isn't the first time a young member of the royal family has stepped out of the limelight. But each time it leaves its mark. When a child steps into the shadow of the crown, the way back is often complex. Public life in the royal household isn't just a stage, but an integral part of their identity. The fact that the decision is described as permanent seems particularly significant. It's clearly not a short-term hiatus. Rather, it appears to be a strategic realignment or a protective measure with long-term consequences. The contrast between the cheerful, unpredictable energy for which Prince Louis was known and the sudden silence further amplifies the impact. He was considered the vibrant spark on the balcony, the one whose naturalness made him a viral sensation. Now that spark has been extinguished, at least in front of the cameras. Within the monarchy, this development could be more far-reaching than the matter-of-fact announcement suggests. For when a young prince is deliberately removed from the public eye, the question of the balance between tradition and protection inevitably arises. Is it a sign of modern sensitivity to the pressure of public attention? Or does it point to internal tensions that have so far only been visible behind closed doors? And if this decision was indeed made in Prince Louis's best interests, what does that say about the expectations placed upon him? The official statement does not end the speculation. It opens a new chapter. A chapter in which absence becomes headline news and silence becomes strategy. The crucial question remains. Is this a temporary protective measure or a turning point that will change the image of the Welsh family in the long term? In retrospect, the last major balcony appearance seems like a scene with a hidden message. At the time, it appeared to be an ordinary moment of royal staging. The family gathered the cheering crowd, cameras clicking incessantly. Prince George stood focused and disciplined next to Prince William. Princess Charlotte smiled composedly at the crowd, and Prince Louis, usually known for spontaneous grimaces and unpredictable reactions, seemed noticeably different. Frame by frame, Observers later analyzed the footage. Prince Louis stood unusually still. His hands, usually used for playful gestures, remained tightly folded. His facial expression appeared controlled, almost rehearsed. What initially seemed like simple childlike reserve takes on a new dimension in light of recent events. A well-known expert on child behavior, who publicly offered her assessment, spoke of subtle signs of inner tension. Stiff posture, averted eye contact, a kind of emotional withdrawal. It was particularly noticeable that Prince Louis stepped back slightly and tensed his shoulders during loud cheers. Barely perceptible to outsiders, but a clear signal to trained eyes. Catherine also came under scrutiny. A brief moment, barely longer than a second, drew attention. As the family waved to the crowd, she glanced quickly at her son. Not a proud smile, but a subtle yet palpable expression of concern. Observers describe it as a moment when the facade briefly crumbled. Prince William also exhibited behavior that is now being interpreted more intensely. During a musical interlude, his gaze wandered over the crowd to the rear, where a senior aide stood. A barely perceptible nod followed. The aide discreetly withdrew. At the time, this scene went unnoticed. Today, it appears as a possible signal. Added to this are reports from photographers. Several photographers, working under the usual royal restrictions, later stated that they had received unusually strict instructions. No close-ups of leis, no single shots, no extended sequences. Shortly before the event, a kind of informal recommendation for restraint was even issued. What was initially interpreted as overly cautious media management now fits into a larger picture. The combination of conspicuous behavior, restrictive image policy, and subsequent complete absence reinforces the impression that this balcony appearance was more than just another obligatory official engagement. Some observers are now speaking of a quiet farewell. No grand announcement, no dramatic declaration, but a controlled, gradual withdrawal from the limelight. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was reportedly already tense at that time. Behind closed doors, there were apparently intense discussions about how much public exposure was still acceptable for Prince Louis. While Prince George, as the future heir to the throne, was being prepared for his role, and Princess Charlotte was increasingly appearing confident, a different dynamic seemed to be developing with Louis. Pressure. Being part of a centuries-old institution doesn't begin in adulthood. Every gesture, every facial expression is analyzed, evaluated, and commented on. For a child, this constant scrutiny can be an enormous burden. In that respect, it seems plausible that protective mechanisms would kick in. However, the abrupt nature of the decision remains remarkable. The timing is also interesting. The period of conspicuous balcony appearances and restrictive media rules immediately preceded the official palace announcement. This creates the impression of an escalation that had long been recognized internally, while the public was still puzzling over it. Catherine and Prince William were at the center of attention. As parents, they bear responsibility for the well-being of their children. At the same time, they are part of an institution whose stability is based on continuity and visibility. The balancing act between protection and duty could hardly be more difficult. Was that balcony moment the point at which the decision was finally made? Was Prince William's nod an internal signal of a change in strategy? And if the restrictive photo instructions already existed beforehand, that suggests a longer-planned measure. With the benefit of hindsight, that public appearance seems like a premonition. Picture that is now read differently. The body language, the fleeting glances, the discreet movements in the background. They come together to form a mosaic that raises questions instead of answering them. The official explanation may be brief, but the pictures tell a more complex story. A story of tension, protective instincts, and possibly a turning point within the Wales family. Was it really just a phase? Or did that day mark the moment when a fundamental decision began to take shape behind the palace walls, the full implications of which are only now becoming apparent? Behind the closed doors of the palace, a quiet but intense conflict developed alongside the public speculation. At the center of this inner circle was Catherine. While she continued to appear controlled, professional, and calm in public, a very different picture is said to have emerged internally. Observers describe her during this period not only as the future queen, but above all as a mother on high alert. According to information from palace circles, Catherine wrote several personal letters to King Charles and Rango's advisors. These letters were reportedly not politically framed, but rather emotionally intense and direct. They were not about image management or scheduling, but about the well-being of Prince Louis. In them, Catherine pleaded for time, for respite from the constant public pressure, and for understanding regarding a development that could no longer be ignored. In these internal accounts, she is said to have described changes in Louis's behavior that were never publicly apparent. Periods of sudden emotional withdrawal, inexplicable tears, and nervousness before official engagements. Reports indicate that Louis began to withdraw during visits from palace staff and reacted with noticeable tension to the sound of cameras. What might appear from the outside to be childish whims apparently took on a different dimension in her private life. Catherine found herself in a dual role. On the one hand, she is part of an institution whose stability depends on discipline, tradition, and continuity. On the other hand, she bears the immediate responsibility for her children. This tension is said to have intensified. While advisors urged restraint and warned against rumors, Catherine insisted on a clear line to protect herself from public overextension. Internally, the argument was that withdrawing would fuel speculation and create uncertainty. In a monarchy heavily reliant on public perception, any deviation from the established image can have strategic consequences. But for Catherine, institutional calculations apparently took a back seat. Her focus was on Louis. Several meetings are said to have been strained. In planning sessions coordinating future appearances of the Wales family, Catherine repeatedly expressed concerns. A scheduled event where Louis was to attend a formal unveiling with his siblings is considered a critical moment. According to internal reports, Louis refused to leave his room that day. Attempts to persuade him were unsuccessful. When the palace insisted on his attendance, Catherine took action. She cancelled her own appearance. For observers within the institution, this was an unusual step. Since joining the royal family, she had been regarded as the epitome of discipline and reliability. A deliberate deviation from the calendar was therefore seen as a strong signal. This development apparently marked a turning point. Catherine is said to have made it clear that she would not accept a recurrence of such situations. It was no longer just about isolated incidents, but about a fundamental rethinking of how Louis's public role was handled. The conflict was not limited to Catherine. Prince William also began to reassess the situation. As the future monarch, he is particularly bound by the expectations of the institution. But as a father, he is said to have increasingly developed doubts as to whether the traditional approach would meet his son's needs. This created a palpable tension within the palace. On one side was the historical understanding of duty and visibility. On the other, the desire for individual consideration grew. This conflict played out not in public, but in meeting rooms, letters, and confidential conversations. During this period, some advisors described Catherine as unusually determined. She was no longer satisfied with empty promises, but pressed for concrete measures. Her goal was clearly a structural reduction of Louis's public presence. The fact that the palace eventually issued an official statement suggests that a decision had been made internally. Whether this decision stemmed from conviction or coercion remains unclear. What is clear, however, is that Catherine played a central role in this process. The dynamic between personal protective instincts and institutional expectations presents the monarchy with a challenge that extends beyond this specific case. When differing priorities become apparent even within the immediate family, it demonstrates the complexity of modern royal responsibility. Did Catherine's stance set a new standard? Does the decision in favor of Louis signify a lasting change in the way the youngest members of the family are treated? And how will this signal affect future generations? Behind the palace's matter-of-fact explanation lies a story of internal pressure from familial resolve and a system that had to readjust. With Catherine's growing determination, the balance of power within the palace shifted noticeably. What initially appeared to be a familial concern developed into a fundamental institutional question. How much individuality can a monarchy, which relies on continuity and symbolism, tolerate, and where does duty end and protection begin? At the center of this conflict was not only Catherine, but increasingly also Prince William. As the direct heir to the throne, he bears the double burden of expectation and responsibility. On the one hand, he is the future guarantor of stability. On the other hand, he is the father of Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. It was precisely this balancing act that apparently placed him in a difficult position. Within the institution, a clear hierarchy exists. King Charles embodies the current authority, supported by Queen Camilla and a closely connected circle of advisors. Traditions are not mere rituals, but strategic instruments. Every public appearance is planned, every gesture evaluated. In this system, a sudden withdrawal acts as a disruptive element. According to internal reports, the discussion was not only emotional but also strategic. Advisors warned of a domino effect. If Prince Louis is visibly removed from public life, questions about the resilience of other family members could arise. The stability of the overall image could be called into question. At the same time, it was emphasized that Prince George, as direct heir, would continue to be rigorously prepared for his role. Princess Charlotte also has a clearly defined public function. In this context, Louis's special role appeared problematic to some decision-makers. Uniformity is considered a strength in the monarchy. But it was precisely here that a new line was emerging. Catherine argued that equal treatment did not automatically mean equal burdens. Each child had different needs. What was appropriate for Prince George would not necessarily be appropriate for Louis. This differentiation represented a subtle but significant departure from traditional patterns. It was apparently during this period that Prince William began to increasingly question the institutional arguments. Behind closed doors, he is said to have repeatedly emphasized that the long-term reputation of the monarchy is not secured through enforced presence, but through credibility and modernity. A system that ignores individual boundaries could cause more damage in the long run than a temporary adjustment. This stance placed them in a delicate position. As heir to the throne, he himself is part of the very structure he is now questioning. Internally, there was talk of a generational tension. While King Charles and Queen Camilla stressed the importance of traditional visibility, William increasingly favored a more modern interpretation of royal responsibility. The atmosphere during the decision-making sessions was said to be palpably tense. Observers describe a period of intense deliberation. Should the withdrawal be officially announced, or would a gradual reduction suffice? What kind of signal would a clear statement send? In the end, the decision was made in favor of a transparent, albeit brief, announcement. The palace confirmed that Prince Louis would be spending a period of protected time away from the public eye. This wording sounds matter-of-fact, but it is the result of complex internal processes. The institution had to acknowledge that modern expectations regarding mental health, child development, and privacy carry more weight than just a few decades ago. At the same time, it was crucial not to jeopardize its image of stability. For Catherine and Prince William, this decision represented a symbolic victory. For King Charles and Queen Camilla, it represented an adjustment, perhaps reluctant, but strategically necessary. The question remains, however, is this step an isolated incident or the beginning of a structural shift? If the younger generation of the royal family is willing to question institutional customs, this could shape the monarchy's long-term direction. The conflict between tradition and individual care is not new, but it has rarely been so visible. Prince Louis is at the center of a debate that extends far beyond his personal situation. With this decision, a new balance of power has been established within the palace, and Prince William, as the future monarch, will further steer the course toward modernization. It is clear that behind the official statement lies not just a family matter, but a structural process of tension, and this process could change the face of the monarchy more profoundly than the matter-of-fact wording suggests. The decisive moment is said to have taken place behind closed doors, away from cameras, but with far-reaching consequences. The setting was Clarence House, a place traditionally used for confidential discussions. According to internal notes, a meeting took place there that is described as the most heated family confrontation in years. King Charles, Queen Camilla, and Prince William were present. The atmosphere was said to be tense even before the conversation began. Prince William arrived with a folder under his arm, a detail that later received particular attention. This folder is said to have contained reports, internal assessments, and medical information, including a written statement from the doctor whom Louis had reportedly avoided for a long time. Initially, the conversation appears to have been controlled. Prince William presented his arguments in a structured manner. He referred to Catherine's repeated observations of the changes in Louis's behavior and the need for preventative action. It wasn't about rebelling against the institution, but about a reassessment of priorities. However, the tone reportedly became more heated when the discussion turned to the public impact of a potential withdrawal. According to insiders, Queen Camilla suggested that Louis might simply be going through a difficult period. Prince William apparently perceived this assessment as downplaying the situation. At that moment, the situation escalated. Prince William stood up, firmly closed his folder, and made it clear that his son should not be part of a strategic maneuver. Observers describe this scene as a turning point. The future monarch openly stood up for his son, not as a representative of the crown, but as a father. King Charles reportedly tried to calm the situation, emphasizing that every decision would be made in the best interests of the family and the institution. But Prince William remained firm. He was adamant that Louis's well-being should not be subordinated to institutional considerations. This confrontation apparently marked a new dynamic. For the first time, the conflict between tradition and individual care was not only implicit but also explicitly addressed. The fact that Camilla's influence was also discussed demonstrates the complexity of the internal power dynamics. Following this meeting, the decision was reportedly reached more quickly than many had anticipated. The official palace statement followed shortly thereafter. It was concise, precise, and devoid of further details, yet its creation was anything but smooth. For Prince William, this step represented a clear statement of position. It signaled his willingness, as future king, to question established patterns. For Catherine, it confirmed that her persistent efforts had paid off. For King Charles and Queen Camilla, the situation presented a challenge to recalibrate the balance between continuity and adaptation. The conflict remained internal, but its effects are visible. Prince Louis has withdrawn from public life. The message behind this is clear. The next generation of the royal family is not prepared to completely subordinate individual needs to tradition. At the same time, this development raises strategic questions. If Prince William is already drawing clear lines, how will he act as king? Will he consistently modernize the monarchy? Or is this a one-off, exceptional situation? The symbolic significance of this meeting at Clarence's house extends far beyond the specific decision. It demonstrates that even in an institution based on centuries-old structures, internal conflicts are possible and sometimes necessary. Prince Louis is at the center of a development that is likely to have a lasting impact on his life. Whether he will one day return to public life or remain permanently in the background is currently unclear. What is clear, however, is that his withdrawal is the result of an intense, at times explosive period within the family. The crucial question now is, has Prince William, with this confrontation, ushered in a new era? An era in which personal boundaries are valued more highly than institutional expectations. This meeting has not only brought about a decision, it has visibly shifted the balance of power in the palace, and the long-term consequences could extend far beyond the current situation. What initially appeared to be a familial safeguard is increasingly becoming a symbol of a possible reorientation of the monarchy. Prince Louis has disappeared from the public eye, yet his absence feels more present than ever. It represents a deeper shift within the royal family, where tradition and modernity collide. The official palace statement remains deliberately brief. Protected time, a decision made in the best interests of the family. No details, no time frame, no prospect of a return. This very reticence amplifies the signal, because in an institution built on visibility, invisibility is a powerful statement. Catherine and Prince William have made it clear with their stance that they are prepared to redefine priorities. While previous generations often followed the expectations of the institution without compromise, a more nuanced approach is now emerging. Individual needs are apparently gaining more weight, even if this temporarily disrupts the familiar image of unity. For King Charles and Queen Camilla, this development represents a balancing act. On the one hand, stability must be maintained. On the other hand, the younger generation is demonstrating that rigid structures are no longer accepted without question. This dynamic could shape the direction of the monarchy in the long term. Quanter finds the strategic dimension particularly interesting. The public perception of the royal family has changed dramatically in recent decades. Issues such as mental health, child development, and privacy are being discussed more intensely in society. A monarchy that ignores these developments risks falling behind modern expectations. Prince George remains clearly positioned as the direct heir. Princess Charlotte also plays a visible role. Prince Louis, however, now seems to have been deliberately placed outside this dynamic. This differentiation could be interpreted as a protective mechanism or as a long-term strategic decision. At the same time, it remains to be seen whether this withdrawal is permanent. Will Louis be gradually reintroduced in a different setting, or does this phase mark a fundamental redistribution of public responsibility within the family? The balance of power in the palace has visibly shifted. Prince William has signaled his willingness to resolve internal conflicts when it comes to his children. Catherine has demonstrated that she not only represents but also shapes policy. This combination of elder preference resolve and institutional responsibility could define the future form of the monarchy. Historically, it is often inconspicuous moments that initiate long-term changes. A missing seat on the balcony, a terse announcement, a confidential meeting at Clarence House. These elements combine to paint a picture that reveals more about the future of the crown than many public figures are willing to discuss. Prince Louis himself symbolically represents a new generation. A generation that doesn't automatically want to be seen as part of a staged performance, but rather as individuals with their own boundaries. Should this attitude catch on, the monarchy's self-image could be fundamentally altered. The public is watching closely. Every future decision will be interpreted in this new light. If Louis returns, it will be seen as a deliberate comeback. If he remains in the background, it could be interpreted as a permanent realignment. One thing is certain: the current situation is more than an episode. It is a touchstone for the balance between institution and family, between tradition and adaptation, between public expectation and private responsibility. If Prince William's approach has ushered in a modernization that foreshadows his reign, Catherine will be remembered as a driving force behind a new sensibility. And what does this mean in the long term for Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis? The answers to these questions will not be found in a statement. They will become clear in the coming years. But one thing is already evident. Behind the silence surrounding Prince Louis lies a movement that is quietly but noticeably shifting the foundations of the monarchy. Prince Louis's sudden absence from key public engagements has sparked a debate that goes far beyond a mere retreat. After weeks of mounting speculation, the palace confirmed a period of protected time away from the public eye. But the background reveals a complex internal process. Subtle changes were already noticeable during his last balcony appearance. Observations of body language, restrictive photo instructions, and an increasing reticence suggested that tensions were building behind the scenes. In Twickelton, Catherine spielt dabei ein zentrale Rolle, indem sie wiederholt auf das Wohlergehen ihres Sohns hinwies und konkret Schutzmaßnahmen fordert. Prince William unterstützt dies Haltung zunehmend und stellt institutionelle Prioritäten in Frage. Ein Entscheidens Treffen in Clarence's Haus mit King Charles und Queen Camilla markiert offenbar den Wendepunkt. Dort wird deutlich, dass die nächste Generation bereit ist, traditionell Muster zu überdenken. Die offizielle Mitteilung des Palasts ist das sichtbare Ergebnis dieser internen Auseinandersetzung. Sie signalisiert ein mögliche Verschiebung hin zu mehr individueller Rücksichtnahme innerhalb der königlichen Familie. Ob dies eine einmalige Anpassung oder der Beginn einer langfristigen Modernisierung ist, bleibt offen. Prinz Louis' Abwesenheit ist damit nicht nur ein familiares Thema, sondern ein Indikator für strukturelle Veränderungen. Die kommenden Jahr werden sehen, ob dies Entwicklung das Selbstverständnis der Monarchie dauerhaft prägen.